We have been doing research as our main aim. 50% of our efforts go towards that. Another 25% goes towards education. Education is focused on bringing science and spirituality together. Really want to walk the tightrope of science here and back up whatever we can with the science elements. And then the third aspect is actually looking at outreach efforts. So most of you may know that we had this conference last October at the Harvard Medical School Joseph B. Martin Conference Center. It's a two-day conference on science of consciousness and the social impacts on it. This center is named after the spiritual master Sadhguru, who has almost 2 billion followers across the world, and is very contemporary, and we are trying to give the science backing and see whether we can provide science evidence to that. So we have neurologists and several other people in the same picture that you see here. All right, so it's my privilege to introduce the speakers today. We have Robert Thomas again. Robert Thomas is professor of medicine from Harvard Medical School. And he's also a sleep specialist. He's practicing sleep medicine at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. Robert Thomas is a dear collaborator for us in our sleep research. And we have the privilege of Dr. Stickgold, Robert Stickgold, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And he's from Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center as well. He has done a ton of research in the field of sleep and dreams and also in the field of sleep and cognition, and is a very well-known speaker in many, many domains across the world. And we're so privileged to have you, Dr. Stickgold. Thank you for you coming and joining us today. And thank you, Robert Thomas, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure and a privilege.
Great. So I thought before we launch into this world of dreams, etc., I thought first we'll recall what we have spoken last week. And Robert, you were there. Robert Thomas, you were there last time, and please feel free to add if I'm missing any salient features. So what we talked was that sleep is non-negotiable. It's an active process. It seems like it's a panacea for a lot of things, like better mental health, blood pressures, cardiac health, body weight, you name it. And like Dr. Robert Stickgold's work, better memory and cognition as well. So we learned a lot about it. Most important was about maintaining a better sleep schedule, no caffeine after 2 p.m., better lighting, and also maybe the last meal at least 3 hours prior to sleep. And from the spiritual point of view, we have known this for many, many years and for millennia, actually, how to leave off your things of the day and not just carry it to the sleep. You know, sometimes there's also a famous chant that people do, which says that whatever you created today's activities with your mind or your body, just let it go. And before you just go to sleep, and after that you go to sleep. So it seems like all these sleep hygiene techniques are very, very important to really have a very good sleep. And it'll allow you allow sleep to rejuvenate you so you're ready for the next day. Thomas, you want to add anything that I missed here to recapture what we talked last time?
No, it's pretty good.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. So before we get into the main core of this aspect, today's core is about memory, dreams, etc. But I also wanted to ask Robert, there were some questions that we couldn't cover last time. Some of them were talking about insomnia, and other than the sleep hygiene that you recommend, can you also talk about some of the common medications that are used now, and what is the contemporary literature that compares insomnia treatments with non-pharmacological treatments such as meditation?
Sure. So one can take the analogy of high cholesterol. Now you can do a lot of good things to lower your cholesterol. But depending on what the situation is, like if you've had already heart disease, as an example, it may simply not be possible to lower your cholesterol enough to have maximum benefit, and you had to reach for a medication. Same thing with diabetes. Some folks, if they lose weight and lifestyle changes, your blood sugars are normalized, others not so. Similarly, the best sleep hygiene, the best circadian management can get a substantial proportion, 60, 70% of patients who have chronic insomnia, to a pretty good place, at least an acceptable place. But there will be a substantial minority, and this is increasing thanks to just diseases in general, cardiac, neurological, psychiatric, traumatic brain injury, of course, tremendous stress, shift work, and so on, where however good your sleep system is, it is under enough stress to cause some degree of subjective fragmentation. And that's what, is called insomnia. There are patients who objectively their sleep looks quite crummy when you measure it, but they have no complaints. So there is some dissociation between objective and subjective. But once you come to a point where you're still asymptomatic despite non-pharmacological measures, then it's a trade-off. Short-term therapy is not something which will work for chronic insomnia. Of course, if you have acute insomnia, severe stress, death, etc., yeah, sure, short-term insomnia therapy is fine. But most of the medications, FDA approved, have not been studied more than maximum 12 months, often 3. So you're sort of we are all sort of on our own, and we go by clinical, clinical experience, I guess. And there are 3 ways to think about drugs which target insomnia. If you look at the brain, you have the cortex. You have, of course, the brainstem with all the activating systems, orexin, histamine, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and such. So some drugs target the bottom. So it's a bottom-up management. So orexin antagonists, antihistamines, clonidine, which blocks the function of the norepinephrine pathway. These are sort of bottom-up approaches. The top-down is a drug like, say, trazodone, which really works on the cortex. And then somewhere in between are the standard, commonly used ones like zolpidem, zaleplon, eslopicone. It works on the thalamic, kind of the central root of sorts. And in reality, combinations should be better, but it's like no one has the guts to do a clinical trial of a combination so far, unlike hypertension and diabetes and so on. But in clinical practice, we sometimes do use combinations. So if a person has a lot of bottom-up driving, chronic pain as an example, irritable bowel syndrome, post-traumatic stress disorder, the so-called Z drugs like zolpidem doesn't really work very well. And the classic benzodiazepines may work well, but they come with a lot of baggage, so we try not to use it. But we try top-down, we try orexin antagonists. Unfortunately, many of these newer drugs, they're more expensive, so insurers don't really consider them as unique. They just consider them as another expensive one. So you have to cycle through a number of drugs. So a pragmatic approach would be to maximize what you can do without drugs. And then the patient has to decide, are they willing to take some known and some unknown risks over time? But in the sleep clinic, we can generally help almost everybody with insomnia. Can't fix like everybody 100%, but we can help almost everybody. Suggesting that those who have persistently problematic insomnia are simply not getting the help which they deserve.
Great. Thank you, Robert. Somebody asked, what is a chant for promoting sleep, especially if you're revved up? You can even do meditation before you go to sleep, contrary to popular belief that it makes you more awake. You may be awake and bright for a few minutes, but then you can sleep well with even short guided meditations. The chant, Dr. Kamala Madali, you were asking, we'll put it in the chat. It's called Karacharana Kritamba. So basically, it just summarizes what I mentioned. So switch gears to Dr. Robert Stickgold, and you've done so much of research, we can talk all day about all the work that you've done, but I just wanted to take 2 major approaches. One is cognition and memory, and the second is the dreams per se. So because of the popular questions, we'll go to dreams first. You have confirmed or disproved Freudian's theory on the dreams with your famous work that you first did. Can you talk a little bit about that dreams research, Dr. Stickgold? You can unmute yourself, please.
Freud's theory in its simplest form is that we dream in order to promote sleep. that if we didn't dream, that what would happen is these forbidden desires, these repressed desires would come up and take over our cognition and be so upsetting that it would wake us up. So first of all, it's not me who's really disproven that. That's been disproven over the last almost 50 years now by just a multitude of studies that say that that's not what our dreams are about. And so that sort of leaves us with the question of what dreams are about. And you can take it where you want in questions.
Right, sure. Let's talk about what dreams are about. From here, let's say the majority of the dreams are about. I guess there are multiple dreams subtypes. For example, from the spiritual world, I'm paraphrasing here someone, a spiritual master, he talks about 85% of the dreams are because of a broken psychological framework, and another remaining 15 to 20%, he talks about, how you get to such deeper states of sleep that you can actually access the subconscious, if you will, and that can be manifest in some people. And then the last two, he talks about even forecasting some ominous events to come, like 48 hours or so. You might, for example, a thunder somewhere, lightning somewhere, etc. And the last piece, he talks about creativity, where you can create things, and I think that is very common. We can maybe start from there because it's very important and interesting. Like the creation of periodic tables that happen in the dreams. So it seems like something happens in that creative dreams, even though it's a very smaller percentage, where everything seems to fall in place, spiritually, or you can think of that as a greater access to a larger intelligence, whatever that intelligence is, where you can connect things that you are not normally connecting when you're completely awake. Can you talk a little bit about that, Dr. Stickgold?
Sure. Let me start with the question of creativity, because we've been doing some recent studies looking at that. It turns out that it's actually relatively easy to control or manipulate the content of someone's dreams, at least in the very initial part of sleep. I don't know what happened to my image, but it's gone sort of strange. But it'll have to do.
Yeah, we can hear you, yeah.
So we have been able to do studies, and this is largely the work of Adam Horowitz, who was a student at MIT when these studies were done, who is now graduated and beyond, where he was able to show that if you just plant a suggestion in someone's mind before they fall asleep, they will, with very high reliability, dream about it in the very first few minutes of sleep. So in his study, he would actually tell people, as they were lying in bed preparing to go to sleep, to just think about a tree, a very banal, presumably not emotionally hot topic for someone, but just think about a tree. And then he would wake subjects up after they had been asleep for somewhere between 1 and 5 minutes, and he would ask them, what was going on in your mind? What were you dreaming? What were you thinking? What were you seeing? And it turns out that 72% of the time, they would report that they were dreaming about a tree or trees or parts of trees. They might dream that they were looking at their fingers and they were actually limbs and not fingers anymore. Or they would imagine that they were on the moon and this tree was holding an American flag. So they'd have these quite bizarre dreams, as well as simpler dreams about a tree in the backyard where I grew up, one of them said. So that was sort of surprising that we could have such easy and simple control over the content of someone's dreams. And presumably they could choose any topic they wanted to as they were starting to fall asleep or prepare to fall asleep and having into the dream. What was
sorry to interrupt. So you're saying that within 5 minutes of falling asleep, they're able to recall, get to the dream states? That seems like very, very quick.
So you're thinking REM sleep, which we normally don't reach until about 60 to 90 minutes after sleep onset. But the very first, earliest stage of sleep, stage 1 sleep, hypnagogic sleep, has a dream recall rate almost as high as REM sleep. It's up in the 80% of awakenings. 80% of the time it wakes up in those first few minutes of sleep. will report that we're dreaming and be able to report dream content. It's an often overlooked component of our nightly dreaming, but it might be a very important one because it might be involved both in creativity and in setting the brain up for what it's going to be dreaming about and processing later in the night. So in this case, it was a nap study, and subjects would be awoken possibly multiple times during those 90 minutes to give sleep onset reports. Again, each time they fell back asleep. And then after they were all done and they were back up, Adam gave them a series of tests of creativities, and specifically creativity around the word tree. What I was talking about is that there are various creativity tests that Adam gave them, and they vary from something as simple as write a short, creative, one-page story about a tree, or think of all of the possible bizarre uses or unusual uses for a tree that you can come up with. Someone suggested a toothpick for a giant. And he gave them in a third test a series of nouns and asked them to come up with the first verb they can think of to go with that word, and used words like tree and branch and limb and root and leaf. And then afterwards, there was a second group of subjects who went through the exact same protocol, but instead of being told to think about a tree as they were falling asleep, were just asked to pay attention to their thoughts. So no particular direction at all. And when he looked at these two groups and their creativity after this 90-minute nap related to the topic of trees, those who had dreamt about it, those in the dream group where they were prompted to think about trees, showed significantly greater creativity around the topic of trees than those in the control group. And even within that group, the ones who reported having dreamt about a tree more times on being awakened in these serial awakenings, the more time they referred to trees in those dream reports, the more creative they were. So it really seems that if you dream about something, it enhances your creativity on that topic, that somehow it makes available to you after you've awakened up associations, connections between that topic and the full range of memories and associations that you carry in your brain.
So can I, it's intriguing to ask this question because you plant a thought first and then they think about the same thing as they go to sleep. And when they go to sleep, potentially maybe there is something that is not there in the awake state, right? Which is there in the awake state is lost in the sleep state. Let's say that inhibitory effects of frontal, or maybe the chaotic thinking process, which is kind of inhibiting their creativity, suddenly just that is lost. And now you're able to seamlessly work on the problem and come up with a solution.
Yes.
Can it be as simple as that?
So I wrote a book a couple of years ago with a colleague, Tony Zadra, and we came up with this proposal for the function and mechanisms of dreaming, which we call Next Up. And Next Up stands for Neural Exploration of Possibilities. And what we suggest is that when you are asleep and the outside world is shut off, your neurochemistry is altered, the neurophysiological activity in your brain is altered, what happens is that you gain greater access to associative memories. And so if you were thinking about a tree, or if you were thinking about some problem from the day, or something of great interest in the day, something by our concept that your brain has noted as being not completed, a process that is not completed, such as dealing with a problem or planning for something in the future.
Right. You mentioned something called associative memory, right? So is that memory bank limited to that person's experience of past, right? They have to have something that has happened from the time they were born until then to have that as a memory stored within them. Is that something related to that recordings of memory, or can it be even outside of that?
So in our theory, it is. If one wants to take a more spiritual approach and suggest that there is some larger source of information that the brain can become available by non-traditional ways. All I can say is that we haven't studied it, and I don't know of any good information that it occurs. You mentioned the concept of predicting things that happen in the future in a dream. And that certainly happens. I've had many people come up and tell me about that. And of course, some of that is going to be just coincidence. It turns out I did the calculation was that something like 15% of the population will dream about the death of a close one within 3 days of the actual death of someone who they are close to. And that's just the rate at which those dreams occur. And so it would not be surprising that for some percentage of the population, they dream about a death, and totally by coincidence, someone then dies. That's explanation one. Explanation two is that the brain is, in fact, using information it has to predict events that they didn't have access to beforehand. And the example that I love is a woman who told me how she had a dream that her father had died and woke up in the morning to get a phone call from her mother saying that her father had a heart attack during the night and died. And she said to me, Bob, she said, he was in perfect health. In fact, I had talked to him yesterday, and he was laughing about this tennis game he had played. He said he played so hard, his shoulder felt stiff for hours afterwards. Now, you two know, you and Dr. Thomas know, because you're physicians, that referred pain experienced as a stiff shoulder often reflects cardiac dysfunction, a heart disease, a heart attack. And this is probably a piece of information that she had picked up some point in her past, in her actual life, did not think of it when her father mentioned his tennis game. But as she was dreaming and thinking about her father and how powerful and healthy he was, her brain found this connection from the sore shoulder to the heart attack and gave her this dream, which predicted it in almost a clinical way. So it wasn't a message from outside of her that came into her. It was a message inside her that she had not been aware of until she had it in the dream. And then the third possibility is that dreams come from, and dreams and predictions in dreams come to us from some outside source, what we would call ESP, extrasensory perception. And all I can say about that is I haven't seen any convincing evidence that it exists. If it exists, it's probably rare because we don't hear that many reports of it. You know, we'll have someone give a report that once or twice in their life they had it. But beyond that, I can't say anything as a scientist.
Right. So now I want to make sure that we draw a fine distinction here that even the spiritual master, when I paraphrase him, he doesn't say that it's being sent from somewhere, right? It's like having an access to a larger amount of information that you normally don't have in a conscious environment when you're awake. It seems like suddenly you have access to all these information and you're able to connect these longer leaps of connections that you make. So that is what is fascinating to me. This is societal impact because we often have unsolvable problems within ourselves. You know, sometimes frustrating problems like the periodic tables, or often people talk about how Edison used to sleep with he made like an elaborate arrangement when he went to sleep or took naps, where he would be woken up by these steel balls falling on his pan or something. Like, he gets up and he writes his ideas. So it seems like this has got implications like that, because there is also another thinker. His name is, he was in the 1900s, 1915 onwards. His name is Jiddu Krishnamurti, who talks about how, you don't think through a problem. It's like analysis paralysis. You just sit down and you get a greater insight into the whole thing, and there, bingo, you get a solution for it.
That's exactly what our next up model says. Our next up model says that the brain identifies some waking source of concern, some incomplete process from waking, and it then searches through our entire network of associative memories, often, especially in REM sleep, looking specifically for weak and normally unidentified associations. And it finds these associations, and then it brings them together, and it builds them into a dream. And then it just looks and asks, does this seem like it might be relevant? And the way it does that is by looking at the affective response of the dream character in the dream. So in the dream I described to you before, the woman in the dream got very upset in the dream when she found that her father had a heart attack. And the brain said her father had a heart attack. And the brain then says, okay, this connection, playing tennis to heart attacks, is a valuable connection. And it strengthened that association between her father's playing tennis and the heart attack possibility. And so it gave her brain then, within the dream, the ability to explore the possibility that that association is useful and meaningful.
I can make a quick comment. So since the advent of ChatGPT and similar large language models, I've been thinking about how they and dreams have some commonalities. You can ask a large language model a question, and it will come up with something. You can ask it another question, and it'll come up with something more. And if you throw in 2 or 3 keywords, you can get fairly complex outputs. Similarly, as part of the activation function in REM sleep, whatever be its biological importance, it can trigger, activation of the vast trillions of synapses with information in it, and create stories, create things. Now, if something is more active and closer to the threshold, that will come to the surface, like trees or recent memories and such. But what I find most intriguing is that sometimes we dream of, say, a person, but then that person is engaged, or you're engaging with experience, episode, which never actually happened, but it's perfectly coherent. It's not like random words or ideas and such sticking together. It's almost like you're writing a novel of sorts, a brief novel. And that reminds me very much like what the large language models do. And I would say that the large language models are more like REM sleep rather than the other way around. And of course, they hallucinate too. And talking about insight, my own experience, around 1999 or 2000, I was struggling with a problem in figuring out a certain thing in sleep apnea, bad breathing during sleep. And a lot of thoughts every night. But one morning I woke up and I had the answer. Literally, I woke up and it was the answer. And that answer has stood the test of scientific inquiry. It's changed the way we practice sleep medicine and so on and so forth.
Is this the sleep image you created?
Sorry?
Is this the sleep image ring that you created?
No, this is, well, that was the second one. So I had 2 of them. That was one of them, and the other was what I call complex sleep apnea. It was just based on various ideas I had floating around, but then this new one came up, which had essentially nothing to do, at least nothing obvious to do with the others. Literally, I woke up and I knew it. I wish these things happen more frequently, but it's,
So let me make 2 comments about that. First, I don't know a vast amount about these large language models, but I know that models like ChatGPT sort of look for the most frequently seen word to follow the word before. So in that way, they're following the path of least resistance. And dreaming is very different from that, because when you're dreaming, your brain specific, and especially in REM sleep, we've seen it, your brain is actively looking for the association that is not common. So if we take people and wake them up from REM sleep, or wake them up from stage 2 non-REM sleep, And very quickly, in less than 3 minutes, as their brain is still adjusting to being awake, we ask them to do something that's a word pair test, where we give them 2 words, and we give them a word and then a second word and ask them, is this second one an actual word or a made-up word? So it might go good, bad, or it might go good, badge, B-A-J, and they have to say it's a word or it's not a word. And normally what you find is people are very much, very consistently faster by about a quarter second at identifying a string of letters as a word if it followed a prime that it's strongly related to. So if it was good, bad, it would be fast. If it was good, pleasant, it'd be a little bit slower. And if it was good, potato, it'd be even slower. And what we find is that those weak associations, the good, pleasant, as opposed to good, bad, which is a very strong association, that the weak associations are responded to faster than the strong associations when you wake them from REM sleep. So that chemistry and connectivity of the brain, the shift to a cholinergic modulation, the shutting off of noradrenergic modulation, allows neural networks to reach further and preferentially find weak associations. So that's one difference. The other thing I want to point out is that while it often comes up with these truly brilliant discoveries, like the ones you imagine, it even more frequency or as frequently comes up with wrong ones or just plain silly ones. And the one that comes to my mind is the one where you have a dream where you find yourself in bed with someone who you work with, who you have absolutely no physical or emotional attraction to. And you actually, in this dream, will often wonder how you got into this situation. And then you wake up and you sort of go, blah, blah. Why would I ever have a dream like that? I would never want to. So again, your brain is exploring possibilities. That's what next up is. It's a network exploration to understand possibilities, not to necessarily find the right answer, but just to sort of say, hey, here's a possibility that you haven't considered before.
Bob, do you think there's an innate capacity to dream, like, motor patterns in the spinal cord, in the brainstem, basal ganglia? We're all born with them.
Mm-hmm.
We can walk without being taught how to walk. You think there's some minimum innate capacity to dream?
Oh, I think dreaming is an absolutely innate. I assume that everybody has the ability to dream, that everybody does dream, that it is an important function of the sleeping brain. I mean, I spent 25 years showing how sleep facilitates memory processing. It's something you learned before you went to bed. You would either remember it better, you'd be able to do something faster, you'd be able to see more associations after a night of sleep. And in fact, that might, as much as anything else, be the function of sleep, or one of the important functions of sleep. And to me, dreaming is part of that. Dreaming is about not strengthening a memory that you formed before you went to bed, or finding a clear intentional association to that, but allowing your brain to really explore throughout the realm of your knowledge to see if there's information tucked away somewhere that might be critically valuable in helping you solve some ongoing problem. And I think of it often as being like a venture capitalist. It doesn't have to work every time to be a very profitable model. Venture capitalists expect most of their investments to fail, but to have some investments that just return 100-fold profit. And so to discover something really important through this method of association to weak associates, the brain is willing to trade off for a lot of associations that it comes up with, where the dreamer and the brain end up saying, nah, this is not actually a valuable association.
So I know there's a lot of people also putting things in the chat, so keep putting your chats in. So we may extend by like 10, 15 minutes if both the speakers are okay with it. So one is about creativity. You talked about, it seems like you're constantly thinking about the problem, and then in the moment of deeper relaxation, you seem to find that you may find the solution, and you may actually find something creative. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is, as people are typing in the chats, is the lucid dream states that people talk about. Rudy Tanzi from MGH has talked about that, how he was able to find Alzheimer's disease in his lucid dream. So one is to let it happen spontaneously. The other is to direct your dreams towards that. It seems like they're actually, if you will, awake during that time partly, and actually making it direct. How do you actually do that? Is that something, can you train it? Can you expand on a little bit of, making it productive for yourself?
So you can train for it, and I would urge people to look up the research of Ken Paller at Northwestern, who has been doing a lot of work with lucid dreaming recently, and has come up with a protocol that he says can get 2/3 of people who don't report that they have very many lucid dreams to have a lucid dream in the laboratory on a first attempt. So you can look there. Its uses for creativity have not really been studied, but there's no reason not to assume that they can be. It's not that different from our concept of having someone think about a tree before they fall asleep as a way to inducing the way the brain goes once it falls asleep. I often talk about how in waking we have dreams, I've lost the word, daydreams. Sometimes we let our mind wander, and sometimes we do what's called musing. And musing is a fascinating concept. Of course, it comes from the concept of the muses, who used to bring creativity to people in Greek theory and in Greek religious models. And the idea is that you prime the pump with an idea, and then you just let your mind go. You allow it to shift into this sort of mind-wandering state, but from a starting point that's carefully chosen. I wonder if I thought about apnea from this other point of view, how might that? And then just let the brain go without intentional direction. So whether it's saying tree before you go to sleep, whether it's musing while you're awake, or whether it's introducing this concept of initial control through lucid dreaming, it's always the same process. There's an intentional effort or statistical in the case of next up, to start from some point of inquiry, and then let the mind just go from a bottom-up sort of a way, not from a top-down controlled way, from a bottom-up associative method, to get to new insights. And I imagine this could be done through meditation.
Right. So I was going to say that I see this as a nexus between science and spirituality, where, recently I read an article by Sanjay Gupta in the CNN, where he visits Dalai Lama's center in India, and this was 4 a.m. in the morning, and he was asking how to meditate. So apparently Dalai Lama told him, okay, you sit down with the most pressing problem in your head and just muse about it, right? Just close your eyes and sit down and do it. And bingo, he said, after a few minutes of whatever states he was in, like you said, let the mind wander, you want to call, or let the controls go. And suddenly he found the solution. So it seems like there's a huge nexus here between science and spirituality. And seems like there's something that you're not allowed to explore, like that is released during sleep or during meditation. And you can find the benefits as we do them. It seems very, very similar to me, at least when I'm thinking of it. In one, you sleep, another one, you sit down and meditate. It seems like you really go into those deeper states and let things take over and find the links for your query versus the problem.
And
so
not only did Thomas Edison, as you mentioned,
yeah,
would do this, he would go to sleep thinking about a problem and seeing it solved in his sleep onset dreams. But Salvador Dali used the exact same technique to come up with images for his paintings. where he, again, would have balls, metal balls over a plate and allow himself to fall asleep. And when he woke up, he'd have the images that he wanted. So probably across the whole range of whether you're dealing with interpersonal problems, or whether you're working on a thesis problem or a scientific problem or an artistic problem, this state allows for creativity to arise. One could be pushing and say it's the only way that creativity arises.
Yeah. So here is another question, right? So anecdotally, I don't have reports on this. Anecdotally, we are finding that there's very less known about meditation, sleep quality, etc. So there are some people who say that, well, I don't even know whether I had dreams after they start to meditate. Some people just don't have it. Is there any reason or explanation for that? Or what we're finding in the ongoing experiment, that the REM percentage sleep has actually gone up.
So a couple of things about this. First of all, for at least the next up model, the critical point is when the brain creates this dream in the sleeping person, identifies an emotional reaction from the dream character, and takes that as its signal to literally strengthen the synaptic connections between the daytime concern and the newly discovered weak associate. And it happens then, right at that point while you're sleeping. It doesn't matter whether you remember the dream when you wake up or not. The work is done in the sleep state. And if you happen to wake from the dream, then you become privy to that process. But the process is going on whether you wake up or not. The second point, what was the second point? I've lost it for now. So
no, that's good. There are one more thing before I get to the chat questions is, it seems like you can use the dreams for insomnia, for example, the PTSD that Matthew Walker describes in his work. So it seems like you can use it to treat issues as well, where he talks about where, there is less of noradrenaline that is released, and so that nightmares or the PTSD is not associated with emotions anymore, and then you can actually, grind through the problem. You're finished with the PTSD. It's not PTSD anymore. It's something that happened in the past, and that's it. Can you talk a little bit about that? How to use that process for treating nightmares, PTSD, and things like that?
We are currently working with 2 hospitals, along with the military in Israel, in the wake of the October 7th attacks, to use this dream technique with PTSD patients. And we're just going through the IRB approval process now. But the concept is that we can take people who have suffered from severe trauma and have them use this process of what we call targeted dream incubation, where as they're falling asleep, they hold in mind, for example, an image of a safe place where they feel safe, and hold that as they fall into sleep. And the theory is that when they do that, that this sense of safety and containment will go out and connect through that same associative processes with elements of the trauma, because the trauma has everything to do with not having safe places. And that through that connectivity, they'll be able to make new connections that will allow for insight and processing of the trauma memory. But that's the concept.
Is this a form of image rehearsal therapy?
It's not. We're actually using it in conjunction with image rehearsal as well. Because one of the so image rehearsal therapy is when you take people who have a specific nightmare that repeats, and you have them imagine an alternate ending.
Right.
And then rehearse that memory, that image of the alternate memory. And then as they, in the future, when they fall asleep and start into that nightmare, they can actually direct it into that alternate ending, which is not so negative or not negative at all. And one of the reason we're using it is because there's a lot of resistance among patients to using image rehearsal therapy because they don't believe they can control their dreams. They feel like it's a fool's errand to try to do it. And we've shown that when we use the targeted dream incubation, have people dream about a tree, they literally said, wow, I never knew I could control the content of my dreams. And so that will help them, help people with these recurring nightmares more effectively use image rehearsal therapy. But this isn't actually image rehearsal process. It's just saying, think about a safe place as you're falling asleep, or an object from your safe place as you're falling asleep, and counting on the brain to then, in essence, create these alternate ending dreams, to take that concept of a safe place and move it out into the world of their trauma memories.
This is fascinating. The other issue is with meditation, there's emotional mastery, right? So you are able to dissociate, for example, if there's a PTSD experience, you're able to dissociate the two. And so that way you're able to overcome that. And potentially that can also be used as a way to treat yourself. And while it is being used by random people, but not in a scalable way like you were talking about, I think what you're showing is something very simple that is scalable and that can be used by everyone, whereas meditation is more behavioral. Not everyone chooses to do it, even though that could give you a complete overall of the entire emotions and the other things associated with it. So, I'm going to go into the chats. I'm not doing justice to all the 30 years of work you've done because you're not able to go through everything. One thing, if you want to talk about, is you said your main work is on cognition, right? So sleep and cognition. Can you summarize for us as to how sleep actually helps with memory and cognition before we go into the...
Sure. So although the sort of cellular mechanisms of this are not known, because we really don't understand those mechanisms even during the wake time, we can say that for various types of memory, a night of sleep can strengthen the memory. So if it's a memory of some procedure that you do, like typing, you will be faster at it in the morning than you were the night before you went to sleep. It can stabilize memories. So if you learn a lot of word pairs that you would normally forget half of across 8 hours of waking, across a night of sleep, you not only forget very, very few, like 10%, but over subsequent waking, you don't forget them anymore. So it stabilizes those memories. It can take memories of complex events and take this emotional part and strengthen your memory of that while decreasing your memory of the background of that story. So you just hold down to the emotional core of that memory without carrying all the surrounding information with it. Matt Walker has shown, in fact, that not only do you strengthen the memory of that central object, but the emotion that you experience when you see this emotional scene again is reduced in proportion to how much REM sleep you have. We can have people learn a number or run a series of trials where they're trying to figure out a pattern that they can't figure out very well. Let them sleep on it, and in the morning, they'll be 60% more likely to discover that pattern than if they'd been awake for 8 hours before being retested. So it can pull models out of data. It can find the gist. You can give it a list of words, and it can just extract the gist of that list and hold on to that as a memory as well. So it can do all sorts of levels of processing, from the most basic strengthening and stabilizing of memories in their original form, to extracting the emotional core, to finding the gist, to discovering rules and associations within a large body of data, of experience.
Right. No, that's fascinating. You talked about in general. Can you say in one sentence, is there anything mechanistic well known, such as synaptic pruning and all of that?
No, none of that has been effectively worked out. And it's both frustrating and not that surprising, because we really don't know how memory processing works in wake either. I mean, I tell this joke about calling my friend Dan Schachter, who's a memory researcher at Harvard Department of Psychology. And
Yep.
the joke is that I would call him once a month and I would say, "Hi, Dan, have you found the memory yet?" And he'd say, "Hi, Bob," and hang up on me. because we don't know really at a cellular, molecular, and even intimate network level what memories are, how they're formed, how they're stabilized, how they're recalled. So,
Yeah.
so we're sort of in trouble trying to answer those questions in sleep.
Okay. So there are some questions from the chat which is not covered. I'm thinking what is not covered. So what type of dreams are actually remembered, right? Or what makes you want to remember a dream versus not remembering a dream?
So this relates to a question you asked earlier about people who say they stopped dreaming.
Yeah.
When someone comes to me and asks, how come I never remember my dreams?
Right.
There's three reasons. One, you fall asleep very quickly. Two, you don't wake up multiple times during the night. And three, you wake up in the morning with an alarm clock, or you wake up and just jump out of bed. If that's the case, then you can't remember any dreams because you don't have an opportunity to. If you want to remember a dream, you have to wake up more or less slowly, lie there still, try to stay in a half asleep state, keep your eyes closed, don't even move. Just the process of reaching over to grab a pencil and paper wipes out about a third of your memories of the dreams that were occurring before you woke up. So that's what it takes. You remember a dream when you wake up out of it and stop and pay attention to it before you do anything else.
So Bob, I have a few patients, thankfully, very few because it's hard to help them, who feel they dream so much that they're constantly exhausted. They wake up unrefreshed, they're fatigued all day long. And, measurements of sleep, their REM percentages are fine. And ultimately, the most effective therapy so far has been low dose of monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Interestingly, doing sleep studies when I can after starting the therapy, their REM sleep is still very much there. But the impact of whatever this thing is, where they feel like they're dreaming all night long, seems to have reduced, and they feel better, less tired in the daytime.
It's interesting that monoamine oxidase inhibitors would have that effect because in REM sleep, of course, the release of norepinephrine and serotonin are completely shut off. So monoamine oxidase inhibitor, in theory, under normal circumstances, would have no effect whatsoever.
No effect, correct.
But this would say that if people were releasing some norepinephrine, it would increase those levels, right? If you give an inhibitor of the oxidase. So I don't see how at a mechanistic level, well, that would reduce it because it would make it less of a fully developed neurochemical REM sleep state. So that might, in fact, be part of the reason that balance between norepinephrine and acetylcholine shifting more towards norepinephrine, we would expect to bring down the intensity of dreaming.
So it doesn't wipe out the REM state, but it reduces the capacity to generate dreams.
Right, and you might find that if you look carefully that the number of rapid eye movements per minute decreased or something like that. So
that's possible, of course, yeah.
Intensity of REM sleep, not the duration of it.
Correct.
What is happening with these people and what makes them feel like they have these uninterrupted nights of dreaming? I don't have anything helpful to say, except that we collected in one study, we asked people to describe their dream and then note how long it felt like the dream lasted. And we were very specific because that had kind of different meanings. We said, so if you go to a movie and in the movie, they go through a person's whole life, 60 years of their life. And the movie drags on and it feels like the movie actually took 4 hours, but it was only, in fact, 90 minutes long. 90 minutes is the number we want. How long were you actually watching the movie? And we would get responses from people who said, oh, I I was watching this travelogue, and it went on for hours and hours, and they say they think that the dream lasted for 4 hours. But we know that a dream won't last 4 hours, and that you won't remember. Our best estimate is that you can't remember more than the last 15 minutes of sleep. Sorry, the last 15 minutes of dreaming when you wake up. So there's just something about the content of the dream that makes it feel like it's unending. I have no idea what that is.
Yeah. So I have Dr. Tilak Verma. You had a question. You want to come off Zoom and ask the question?
Thank you, Bala, and it's great to be here, two stalwarts of sleep. So one of the things that you read in the Indian scriptures is that when you're fast asleep, you sort of are not conscious of anything, and then when you arise in the morning, you reflect on the quality of your sleep. You're fully aware that the sleep was fitful, interrupted, or sound, and you just slept like a log. And the implication is that something else experiences that sleep, which is separate from the body and the mind. And in the Indian scriptural system, and maybe I'm misnoting that, Bala, we feel that that it's your super consciousness, your subtle body. So the implication is that we are not our body and we are not our minds. And this whole episode of sleep and the experience within the sleep is one of the arguments in favor of that. And I'm wondering if, the sleep specialist will ever resolve this. So
Robert?
basically, is sleep a function of the body and the mind, or is it somebody else? And, Krishnamurti also talks about that. The knower and the known, the seer and the seen are separate.
So, of course, we don't study that, so we don't know if it's happening or not. The fact that we don't study it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, that it's not happening. It just means that there's nothing that we can say from our research that says anything about it. But I'll give you another example of that. When they were first studying the benzodiazepines, they did a study at the University of Chicago where they took a number of subjects and either gave them benzodiazepines before they went to bed or didn't. And in the morning, they did two things. They asked the subjects, did you get the drug or not? Or did you get the placebo? And they were about 90% accurate in being able to tell you. And then they took the recorded sleep records and gave them to trained polysomnographers, technicians, and asked them which of these are the ones who got the drug and which didn't, and they couldn't tell them apart. So there was something that happens that lets a person have this sense of the quality and the nature of their sleep, just as a sense when they wake up in the morning without knowing where that sense comes from. And we could say that it's, it was processed in the unconscious or the subconscious, that it wasn't stored away in long-term memory to be recalled in the morning, and all that was left was some sort of affective ephemera of the previous night, or that there's something else that we don't know about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's one of the more painful mysteries of clinical sleep medicine. What makes for refreshing sleep, we simply do not know.
Yeah.
Right. So there are more questions here. Let me just check. So one question, provocative question to you, Dr. Stickgold, is if you have to connect what you've done so far and make one ideal experiment, if you're given all the money and resources and even an access to a spiritual master who can be very eloquent and talk to you in a way that you can understand, what would be that?
Oh boy, that's a hard question. Lately, I've been interested in the question of what makes a dream feel meaningful in the morning. Sometimes you wake up in the morning and you remember a dream and you think it was just nonsense. And sometimes you wake up from a dream and you feel it was really meaningful. the sort of dream that you want to tell to other people. And probably everybody here listening to the podcast has known someone who would come up to them and say, oh, I have to tell you this dream I had. And they would then tell you a dream that to you seems absolutely boring and uninteresting, but to them obviously seems to have some great deeper meaning. And so we've been curious about what gives the dream that sense of meaning. And I won't go into it because I don't have time. You can read about it in our book, When Brains Dream. That's the name of the book. But we suggest that the shutting off of serotonin during REM sleep promotes this sense of significance and meaning, and that people wake up from those REM dreams feeling a sense that it was meaningful, whether it in fact shows anything that would justify that feeling. So I would love to do a study where we collect a lot of dream reports, and not a very expensive study, where we collect dream reports from REM sleep and non-REM sleep from subjects, and just ask them to rate how meaningful those dreams are, to report the dreams and rate how meaningful they are, to see if we can show that it's REM sleep dreams with that altered serotonin, and then maybe even try pharmacologic games to manipulate serotonin levels to see if we can manipulate the sense of meaningfulness in their dreams.
Can you create a dream machine?
You are a dream machine. But
for example, at will, for a group of people, I can just put a machine there and make them dream more.
Don't know how to do that yet. I mean, I think that the average person is probably dreaming during 3/4 of the time that they're asleep. Not just in REM sleep. We know that you might have 75 to 80% recall from REM sleep, but you've got 50 to 60% recall at least from stage 2 non-REM, and you have 80% recall from non-REM stage 1. It's only non-STEM stage 3, which is about 20% of your night, that we don't get this high level of dreaming. So it's not about getting people to dream. It's about getting people to remember their dreams. And when someone tells me they can't remember their dreams, how can they remember their dreams? That's your idea of a dream machine. I tell them to drink 3 large glasses of water before they go to bed. And if they do that, they're going to wake up 3 or 5 times during the night to go to the bathroom. They'll tend to wake up at the end of REM periods, and they won't be in a rush to get to work, and they'll remember their dreams. It's a very cheap dream machine.
Bob, what do you think of psychedelics and its impact on REM sleep? Is there much data on that?
No, there isn't really much good data on it. I thought you were going to ask about the psychedelics and their use in psychotherapy, because what they are asked to do, what the drugs are asked to do in this psychotherapeutic use, whether it's psilocybin or ketamine, is to increase associative memory activation, to help them discover new associations, these new creative insights. And that seems to also help lead to a calmer, more stable sense, but also a better sense of self as you knit together these associations. So
you think it borrows REM sleep mechanisms?
Some of them might, but probably not through the same pharmacology. But I think it's the same, sort of from a cognitive neuroscience perspective, I think it's the exact same process. Whether you're coming in through meditation, through dreaming, through mind wandering, through psychedelics, their common path is this activation of associated memories that are outside the range of what we normally consider.
So I'll take one more question from Suran Kapse. He says, if you're online, you can come up and ask a question, otherwise I'll read the question for you. More wine I have at dinner, more people and objects from the past appear in my dream. How do you explain this? Does this happen consistently for over a decade?
The more wine they drink.
Right.
Alcohol, I guess.
Well, yeah, the more alcohol. Well, we know that alcohol suppresses REM sleep, which is interesting, but it tends to suppress it only during the first half of the night. And that can lead to a REM rebound in the second half of the night. Do we have more characters in our dreams in later night REM sleep? We don't know, but that might just be a consequence of intensifying those dreams.
There is more REM energy of sorts in the second half of the night, with the circadian component. Even
Yes.
look at, say, sleep apnea patients who have apnea in REM sleep, exclusively REM dominant apnea. Even for a similar duration of REM sleep, there's far more apnea towards the morning than early in the night. The kind of REM drive, REM
Yes.
pounding is just greater. So if you rebound from alcohol use, you're probably going to just have some seriously strong REM towards the end, and that could explain it.
Ganga, if you want to ask your question, you want to come on and ask. It's a pretty long question here.
I'm going to have to apologize and get
Yeah,
off.
it's the last one. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah, I make it as short as possible. So I had a period of time, several months long, where I used to wake up in the middle of the night after like a nightmare, and every day it was different kind of nightmare. And I was aware the moment I woke up, I was aware I was dreaming. And the next moment, I would immediately think about what I was dreaming about. The moment the thought flashed, immediately I would get all sweating in my body and mind in turmoil and kind of extreme this thing. And it would take me several hours to go back to sleep. Any idea what would have caused this kind of dream and turmoil? This happened for like several months, 4 to 5 months, every night.
So one of the interesting things about dreams is that the physiology, the sympathetic physiology, is not matched to the dream content. So you can wake someone up from REM sleep whose heart rate has suddenly spiked and blood pressure has gone way up. And you wake them up and they tell you, oh, I was just having this dream about being on the beach and lying in the sun. And then you take someone else whose heart rate has actually dropped during REM sleep, and you wake them up and they say, oh, I was being chased by this horrible person who was trying to kill me. So the sympathetic or the autonomic system is not responsive to the dream content normally. So when you wake up from a bad dream, you tend to remember the dream, but not have that physiological sympathetic response going on. If you were to then recall and replay that nightmare in your mind, now your brain's physiology, sympathetic physiology, is back to waking, and it will induce that huge sympathetic surge that you were experiencing.
So I have patients with nocturnal panic, which some resemblance to what you described. Their dreams are perhaps less formed because it's not arising from REM sleep. It's arising from non-REM sleep, but they can have tremendous sympathetic activation.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Morgan, take over from here. So go ahead, Morgan. You're muted, Morgan.
Sorry, sure. So just want to share a few participant opportunities in our research studies. We have the BLISS study here, Brain and Health Meditation Study. We'll also be sharing in the chat some more information about how you can share your interest in these studies. So just to quickly go over a few of them, meditation and sleep study here, some more information about what we need for participants at this point, and our brain age, sleep and meditation study as well. And lastly, thank you for coming. We really encourage you to connect with us on social media, where you'll be able to learn more information about similar events like this in the future and general center updates. We also have our newsletter, which has all of the event recordings, including this one that will be released through there, as well as any research findings we have, center highlights, and all of that. So we encourage you to either go through the chat that will be shared there or through these QR codes.
So finally, I just want to comment that thank you so much, both Robert Thomas and Dr. Robert Stickgold, for making to this podcast today. And we'll put this out as a free YouTube for everyone to listen to. And this is really truly fascinating. I don't think we have covered everything we wanted to, but these are all large topics and it takes a very long time. Thanks again for both Roberts, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.